Welcome to another episode of DD on the Spot. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Johnson. Before I get to our guests here today, I'd like to remind everyone that if you enjoy this content, to please give a like and subscribe down below. I'd greatly appreciate it. We have Amanda Snooks on the podcast. She's a women's physique competitor. She's also a Crystal Suit sponsored athlete. She's coming to us all the way from Florida, but most importantly, she's our current guest. Amanda, thank you so much for coming on.
And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't you give us a little bit of a backstory? Well, first of all, I was going to say, why don't you give us a little bit of a backstory, but then I remembered that you're in Florida. So why don't you just make us all feel bad that are up in the north? What's the weather like in Florida right now?
It is absolutely beautiful. It's like 80 degrees. And I'm sorry for anybody that's
Oh,
in the
that's yeah.
cold right now.
Well, we
I
are
am
act-
originally from Canada, so I
Yep.
know exactly how the cold feels.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. What part of Canada are you originally from?
Well, it's Barrie actually, around
Yeah.
that area, so north of Toronto.
Oh, yep. Yeah, I was just saying, I've had a ton of Canadian guests on, so I love talking to the neighbors from the north. But yeah, moving to Miami and yeah, moving to Florida. That climate. Yeah, you're making me drool right now. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
it's
really beautiful.
yeah, it's like I think it's in the upper 20s here, which is really good for now. But we have had a really rough winter here. But why don't you give us a little bit of a backstory on what inspired and what motivated you to get into shape and adapt that healthy and fit lifestyle?
I've always been like an overactive child. So I grew up on a farm, have horses. It was always my responsibility to look after the horses. So I was basically responsible for them since I could walk. So cleaning their stalls, making sure that they're like at the vet and healthy, riding, training them. So I'm always used to hard work already.
Mhm.
Originally, that's where I built some of my physique from, is lifting water, hay, all of that type of thing. So, and then when I was a kid, I was looking for some sort of sport to get into. So a lot of things didn't really, jive with me. I would get bored of something really easily, move on to the next one. And I remember my mom spending a fortune in all kinds of different types of lessons. I was in figure skating and volleyball and ballet and all kinds of stuff when I was a kid. And then ended up going to a fitness camp when I was in my 20s, and basically it just inspired me to become a trainer and really want to compete. So that's sort of the gist of how I got into this industry.
Yeah, I always say some of these people that we have on have stories similar to that where it's like, yeah, they just build up that strength, early on as a kid, which is so important for a lot of these bodybuilders, especially that we have on, is just, having that little bit of muscle maturity. But I always love to say, if you were to walk into a gym with 100 people, there are 100 different ways as to how those people got into shape, whether it comes down to, their training, their diet, how many reps they do, what exercise they do. So many little things, add up to the overall package that people end up seeing. Was that a struggle for you when you were getting started to sort of figure out what worked best for your body? Because I always say, if you were to walk up to someone and say, "Hey, what did you train for that body part?" It looks amazing. What works best for them 99% of the time is not going to work as good for you.
It did. It was a struggle for a long period of time, but I basically just dove into a lot of information, and always I was always in school. So, I always say every day is a school day, and I am never opposed to like learning new things. I never say that I know everything. So I just had to like play around with a lot of diets to see what works for my body. I also had to learn out what workouts work for my body best, and what's basically going to sculpt and be aesthetically pleasing for my body.
Mhm. And I always love to ask this question because everyone's genetics are so differently, but everyone always has that one body part that when they get started, really, really takes off and, they don't have to train as much. And then everyone has that body part that just lags behind that they sort of have to train to overdrive just to get to catch up to everything. I'll give you my examples. My back, I think it's from, when I was in college, I had a lot of jobs too, where I was like loading trucks and just doing that constantly, I think really built a back where, I can train it once a month. And I always say that's the one body part that looks like I could compete. That's like the one thing where if anyone just saw me from the back, they'd be like, "Oh, he looks really good." And then I turn around, they'd be like, "Oh, well, he's average." But yeah, well, and also I do have to say, that being up in Minnesota, you got to put on, like the 10 to 15 pounds of fat every winter,
Yeah,
just in order to survive. You as someone who lived in the cold know that if you go out there as lean as you get, you're not going to survive.
yeah.
It's going to be rough. But also for me, being 6'3", my legs are just absolutely shot. So I just have to, train them into overdrive. But what were those body parts for you when you were getting started?
I was always like upper body heavy, so for me that's where all of my muscle would
Mhm,
stay. So for me, my hardest body parts for me to train were my legs and to
mhm,
bring my legs in. Because from riding horses, you would think that my legs would actually be like one of my strongest body parts. Aesthetically, it wasn't because um, I I was just a very stubborn kid and didn't really ride the way I should have when I was younger. So I built muscles in areas that it really shouldn't be. So I really needed to level out my legs. And it took me probably a good 3 or 4 years before, and I was training legs twice a week before it really, became symmetrical.
yeah, I always say it's kind of like being like a mad scientist where you just basically, have to come up with your own concoction of what personally works best for you because everyone is so different. But how long into your journey before you decide, like, hey, bodybuilding, like, this sounds interesting. It sounds like something I'd really want to do. And had you had any previous knowledge of bodybuilding prior to that? Was it something that you were aware of, or was it something that you just found out about?
I used to actually, when I was younger, get magazines. And back then, we didn't have the internet or anything like that. So you would have to wait for the magazines to come out to read about all of the greats. So that's how I was originally inspired. And you know what? I still have all kinds of magazines from when I was a kid because I was always looking, reading information, and trying to get knowledge. And that's where most of my inspiration came from.
Mhm.
But fast forward to my young teens and my 20s. My 20s was when I really decided that I needed to do something different. I was very very self-conscious of my body when I was growing up. It led into like anorexia and all kinds of stuff, and I don't really share that story too much. I guess I need to because I'm sure it would really help some people. But getting into my 20s, and when I went to that fitness camp, it was just like a light bulb moment. And everything just transpired from there. And I wanted to compete so bad. I wanted to be a personal trainer, help people. So I was just like, you know, diving into information. I never had a coach for a good at least 7 or 8 years before, and I was competing for 7 or 8 years before I actually hired a coach. So everything was all of me. I just sort of absorbed information and went through trials and tribulations of what worked, and and then it basically got the bug and just wanted to do it over and over and over again.
And that's awesome. And I mean, I always love to ask because so many people in the general public just don't understand that to be able to get into shape to go into a prep takes so much hard work and dedication that I mean,
Yes.
just a very small percentage, like 1 or 2% of people could really get into that type of shape. But then going on to a prep, I mean, that is notching things up to an extreme level where it's like your diet has to be, on point. You have to eat, this many meals at this exact amount of time. I mean, you have to train every single day, or at least, even on off days, you really have to, get your cardio in. I mean, it's just so much hard work and dedication that a lot of people just can't fathom. Was that a big struggle for you, sort of getting into that type of training? Because for so many of our guests that we have on, I mean, it's a big shock knowing that like everything has to be so precise and you have to be very scientific with everything.
I believe it was. Like, I was always a very active person and I always was in the gym. But when I decided to compete, I was going to school at the same time. I wanted to actually become a police officer. So I was going to school for that and, began to do 12-hour shifts and all kinds of stuff. And I didn't know how much time it actually took to be, stay consistent. Um, like all the work, and when I dove into it, it was like, oh my goodness, I didn't know what I was getting myself into at first.
Well, you should have known that going into becoming a cop and doing a bodybuilder, you realize how many jokes they would make about your arms and guns. They would just be like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't." I mean, it's like, come on, that's just asking for it. I mean, it's like, come on. I mean, it's like, come on. But yeah, I mean, I always love to say that, especially with people that we do have a few people that like tried law enforcement, but yeah, I mean, just getting into prep mode is just for a lot of people, it's just so intense. And what was that first prep like? Because, like you said, you were a student, and I mean, just being able to balance that is just so difficult. And it's one of those things that a lot of people, that's one of the reasons why people can't do it is because, just it's one of those things where you can't take a day off. You can't rest. I mean, you have to be on 24/7.
It was nerve wracking for me, because I didn't have a coach at the time. It was sort of I was sort of just doing it I guess, willy nilly sort of. And I was like, is this, what I'm supposed to be doing? And I went to a lot of shows just to watch and see, like how are they posing back then? They didn't have posing seminars and posing classes like they do now. So, I go to shows and be like, oh, I hope this person's posing properly, trying to like critique what they're doing. And but yeah, the prep was time consuming. I was going to school. I was trying to get, all my meals in and the meal timings and all of that stuff. So it was definitely, a hurdle to get through for the first show. And I was just so nervous. I was backstage and I didn't have anybody to help me. And so it was very, very nerve-wracking at first.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine what that would be like, and I mean, that also brings me to, I mean, I love asking because if you were to poll the general public, you'd get such a small singular percentage of people that would be willing to go up on stage in basically a bikini and pose in front of people. I mean, it takes so much dedication and drive. I mean, so many people would not be willing to do that. Was that something that you really struggled with and you really had to work on, just the courage to go up there, or was it like a lot of the competitors that we have on here too, where they just say like, it just got to a point where I just wanted to go up on stage and show it off?
No, I was never like that to begin with. I was a very shy girl when I was going into this, very self-conscious. So it taught me a lot because I did have really bad stage fright when I first, did my very first show. So, but it got better as like, as I got on stage more and more, as I trained and I seen like the transformations in my body, I started to feel more comfortable. It gave me so much more self confidence in myself, in the things that even in day to day life I can do. So, it basically changed my life.
Mhm. No, yeah. I mean, I always, just say just that confidence to go up on stage and, pose in front of, I mean, it just, that alone in and of itself is just so amazing what that takes. But also, I mean, probably the biggest thing that I never would have guessed in my entire life was the hardest thing for a lot of these competitors that have come on is posing. I mean, I never would have guessed that, but for so many people, posing is the hardest thing. It's harder than your diet, it's harder than your,
Yeah.
working out. What has your experience with posing been like? Because I always like to say, I mean, you can be a great poser, you can never be a perfect poser. It's always something that's ever evolving. I mean, and it for a lot of people, I mean, they just don't get, how hard that is. But what has your experience with it been like?
I had to actually enlist when I started getting I was in figure for 7 years. And then I switched to physique. So the jump to physique was detrimental for me to actually have a posing coach because I never really got a lot of help posing when I was in figure. And I didn't really feel like it was comfortable for me. So for physique, I was like, these are different poses. They're more elegant. For me, they seemed more natural because figure for me didn't really. It seemed more robotic. So when I switched to physique is when everything really changed for me. And I hired one of the best posing coaches, and we're best friends till this day. And I always, go to him for posing, and he's one of the best at it. Has a studio in his house, and that's what he does. And he's been a pro for a lot of years. So, and he's also one of our judges. So it helps because you get more critiques from him than you would anybody else because he knows what they're looking for.
Yeah. And that's definitely an awesome thing to have. But out of your physique poses, what is your favorite pose and what is your least favorite pose?
My favorite pose would be the tricep
Hmm.
pose, side tricep, and probably the worst. I don't really generally like the abs and
Hmm.
thighs, just because I'm really horrible at it.
Well, and we
To
hear
be
that
honest,
a lot just because it's just so awkward too. I mean, it's just, and yeah, that's one of those that I've heard, so many times that people is their least favorite. And yeah, I totally
it's
understand that.
because you have to have both it's the muscle mind connection, right?
Mhm.
So you have to have not only the ab connection but the leg connection. So and it has to come together very fluently.
Yeah, that's yeah. And just another big thing about posing too that a lot of people don't get is that for some of these competitors, or I'd say the majority that I've had on, they sometimes sweat and get more of a workout in just doing the posing practice than they do than their actual workout, just because you're trying to flex everything, you're trying to make everything look perfect, and you're trying to get the right angles. I mean, just that hard work and dedication, that just the posing aspect is just insane, and really what that does. But I love to ask as a question that I ask for all my guests, whether they be bands or professors or, my health and fitness guests is, for my bands, I always ask, what is that like, going on stage and performing live in front of, thousands of people, what that feeling is like. But that also applies to the competitors that I have on bodybuilders. What is that feeling like for you when you get to walk on stage, show off all of that hard work that you've worked months upon months on?
I always say to people that are struggling with, like, in the beginning when I was struggling with stage fright, I have a lot of girlfriends and a lot of previous clients who have had the same type of feeling. And I'm like, the way that I cope with it or had to learn was that I'm sort of like a different persona on stage
Mhm.
than I would be in my own, personal space. So I just bring that, like, that sass, that superficial type of persona to stage, and I become a different person. And then when I'm tapping into that, I totally can, take over the stage, and I like it. So
Yeah, and well, and I always say to people, it's like find that one thing in your life that really, brings you that much joy and that much, happiness, and just hold on to it. I mean, we're on this planet for just such a short amount of time, so just find what you love and just hold on to it. But now we go to one of my fun questions. What is your go-to post-show meal?
post show meal, I have a few.
Okay.
Sweet potato fries and a burger
Okay.
is one. Another one is I usually make treats for my friends and for me when I do a show. So they have all my favorite things in them. So they're called slutty brownies,
Mhm.
but they're not actually essentially, I don't make them into a brownie. It's actually more of a cupcake. So they're Oreo cookies, Reese peanut butter cups on top, and then you make a brownie mix and you pour it over top and you bake it. So those are, some of my favorite things. Of course, chocolate, anything that's chocolate.
You're making me drool right now. Jeez, yeah, that sounds so good. And I always said if I ever competed, I would just rent out a Five Guys and just walk in there with like $1,000 and say like, you know what? There's three options of how I'm gonna leave this place. I'm either gonna pass out, I'm gonna throw up, or I'm gonna die. So no, we're gonna we're gonna flip a coin and see what happens. But yeah, I mean, and that just what is that feeling like too? I've always wanted to know like what is that feeling like when you finally get to eat something after being on prep for so long? Does that just taste like the best food of all time? Or some of our guests say, what, because they're so used to eating, a certain way that, it
Right.
and because you can get bloated really easy, I mean, it doesn't taste as good, but what is that feeling like for you?
I think it's like euphoric. I remember like last year I competed at the Arnold's, and it was one really good friend's idea, and she was from Canada too, to go to, there's a place called the Thurmans, I think, in Columbus, Ohio, and it has the biggest burgers that I've ever seen in my life. Um, I think they were like 24, I don't know, 24 ounces or something like
Wow.
that. And and you can actually like win a prize if you eat it. So we had this contest to try and eat it. And afterwards I felt so sick,
Mhm,
but it was definitely worth that feeling.
mhm. Did you at least get the prize?
um we didn't eat all of it.
Oh,
We
yeah,
almost did.
yeah.
Almost did. But it was pretty hard.
Well, yeah, yeah, and that's just amazing because like, we have a Fuddruckers where I live, close to where I live, and they have, like, a thing where you can get your name printed on if you eat, like, a 2-pound hamburger that they have where it's, like, 2 pound of meat, and I was like, "Oh." Yeah, it's I mean, one of my friends tried it, he almost got to it, but yeah, those I mean, some of these burgers that they have, but yeah, I'm just a huge burger guy in and of itself as well. But one of the most important questions that I love to ask, the competitors that I have on the show is because it's another big stereotype is that so many people, I mean, I've had friends come up to me and say, like, Ryan, I'm surprised, when you have these bodybuilders on that a lot of them, they don't look that way, 365 days out of the year, what they look like on the stage, because for so many
Yeah.
people, they don't realize that that look is not sustainable, that you've sort of manipulated your body through all the diet and through all the hard work and through all the training into a look that you're not going to be able to keep. Was that a struggle for you starting out just to sort of realize like, hey, I am not going to be able to look this good 24/7. Like I am going to have to put on weight because we have so many people that come on, they talk about, like how that can really be a difficult struggle for them. And how has that changed as your career has adapted and moved on?
I think as a woman, I think it's a little bit more difficult than being a man
Yep.
in this industry, because we, I mean, we're essentially baby makers.
Mhm.
So we put on more fat and water than a natural person, as a male would. And I think jumping from figure to physique too was quite a difference for me. And the struggle because I worked myself out of figure, but had to realize that I was at the bottom of physique when I did. So I knew that I had to build more muscle, and to do that, you have to have a great off
Mhm.
season, which is, entails more calories. Um, and you have to do it in a healthy type of way. So for me, it was quite a struggle to get used to having a bigger, because I have small bones really. So for me, having that much muscle on me was a big adjustment.
Coming a
I
little
mean,
too heavy and you have trouble walking around and stuff like that, or
yeah, like it was like, wow, like right now I'm 160 at 5'4".
Oh,
So I haven't even started prep yet.
wow.
So and usually when I'm on stage, I'm about anywhere from 125 to 135.
Wow.
So I mean, that's a big
Yeah.
difference. So I think you just have to learn to adapt, and not take you have to love your body at any size and any shape. And it was really, really hard for me to learn,
Mhm.
because I came from like basically a body dysmorphia type of feeling when I first started
Mhm.
anyway. When I was always like very anorexic. I hated the way my body looked. So it was like those old feelings almost jumping back in at first.
Mhm.
But once you get a handle on it and you realize that you have to do it for a reason, and I always try to have different types of clothes or different sizes, so I don't make
Mhm.
myself feel too bad that I
Mhm.
can't fit into this or I can't fit into that.
Yeah.
Um, and as long as I stay, healthy, then I feel good about
Yeah.
myself. I like feeling the feeling of being strong,
Mhm.
um, and lifting heavy, and that comes a lot from off season. And off season is really the building blocks of your physique. So it's the most important.
Mhm.
So as long as you know what you're doing it for, you do it healthy. I mean, that's all that I can
Mhm.
really share. Is
Yeah.
that's helped me a lot.
Oh, yeah, and when I always say to all of our guests, I mean, you still look better even in your off season than 99.9% of people on the planet and still in
Exactly.
better shape
Mhm.
because some people really just struggle with that. And I was like, no, you still look so great. And I always say, just kind of like what you're saying too. I mean, it's just like starting a business. You got to spend money to make money. You got to put on weight if you want to put on muscle. I mean,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's just something that really, I mean, you really basically have to do. So yeah, but it's just that mind adjustment too is just so important. But I also love to ask, especially our guests that come from that past of being so skinny and then going to being like super muscular. How has
Right.
your mind adjusted to that? Because for so many people, I mean, I always like to say if the person might have been like obese or if they might have been really skinny, your mind kind of identifies you as that person. Where you constantly are just thinking like I am that type of person. But since you've made such a huge change in your body, how has your mind been able to adapt to the fact that like I'm really strong now and I'm really really muscular? Was that a difficulty for your mind to just adjust to the fact that like, hey, I am not this skinny person anymore. Like I am a completely different person.
Yeah, I mean, you really have to do a lot of inner work, I think, to be there and personally love what you look like 24/7. Um, and that's what was the struggle for me initially, is because, like I said, I came from that type of an anorexic type of background. And when I came into the industry, like I've been competing for 11 years now, and when I came into this industry, I was ripped and shredded, but I had no muscle.
Mhm.
I was just like this little skinny kid. And I had to sort of change my metabolism a little bit because it was super, super high to begin with. And it's funny because people think like, oh, that's a great thing to have. And it's like, it's just as much a struggle if you're trying to lose weight as to
Mhm.
put it on. So, but yeah, like I did a lot of inner work with myself, and just a lot of reading and stuff like
Mhm.
that, to not try and take myself too seriously. And the outer me is not really necessarily what the inner me is like,
Mhm.
and that's always going to change, and I always have to be cool with
Yeah.
that.
Well, and I always say that's why I love having, especially some of the bodybuilders come on, because so many people when they just look at them in public, they just assume they're not able to look past the muscle and realize that, like there's a human
Right.
being down there that has their own individual story and journey. So that's why I love having them come on and share their story. So then people can just be like, oh hey, they're just a normal person just like me. I mean, they have a hell of a lot more dedication than I will ever have, and drive, but yeah, they're just a normal person. But that also brings us into probably the number one stereotype that I love to bust, and I ask this on every single health and fitness podcast because I really just love busting it. But it's gotten better, I'd say, the last 5 years with Instagram. But there are still so many women that have that
Yeah.
fear where if they pick up one weight, they do one push up, they do one whatever, they're just going to Hulk out and become Dwayne the Rock Johnson overnight. Was that ever a fear that you had when you were just getting started working out? And even if it wasn't, I mean, I bet you hear that all the time. How do you like to respond to that?
It definitely wasn't a fear of mine, because I know ultimately looking at it in the way, like in a logical way,
Mhm.
that you can't, it's not scientifically possible because
Mhm.
we don't have that much testosterone. So, um, and I always have clients that come to me and say the same thing.
Mhm.
So, for me, it's a little bit funny in the fact that you just have to make them see, okay, well, we have a lot more fat and water, and our estrogen's higher, we don't have testosterone. As long as you're explaining it to them in layman's terms where they're going to understand that that won't ever happen.
Mhm.
um like I always say, unless you shoot lots of steroids into your butt, like you're
Mhm.
not really gonna you're not really going to become that. And
Oh,
so,
yeah.
that's about the only way.
Oh yeah, 100%. Unless you are like the 0.000% of people that just have that freak genetic where you're just able to like we had one guest and she came on and then she like showed me a picture like when she was like a kid and I was like, okay, yeah, that's natural. I was like, you're just a freak. You're just born like that. I was like, yeah, you had like an 8 pack as like a kid or whatever. I was like, that's B. I
Yeah,
was like,
there's not a lot like
yeah,
that,
there
but
you'll
yeah.
find like one or two of them where you'll just be lucky, and then like there because like I always like to tell a story. My dad has a friend from college that I mean, my dad played baseball in college, and he had a friend that was on the baseball team, and this guy still to this day. I mean, he might work out like once a month, but he can eat like 10 Milky Ways a day, and he doesn't gain an ounce of fat, and he's still just like solid muscle. And I mean, whenever I see him, because we'll see him every once in a while, I just hate him because like he'll if we eat out with him, like he'll order like $100 worth of food and just pig out and he doesn't gain an ounce. I mean, he's still like super, like he's super shredded and just super lean. And I'm just like, screw you, dude. I mean, it's like just let's just swap genes for just one day,
Yeah,
so I
exactly.
can just
Just one.
yeah. So I can just absolutely pig out. But yeah, I mean, and
Yeah.
I always love to tell a story of like too when I was in college, getting bigger and stronger. One of my friends, she came up to me and she said, like, Ryan, I noticed that you're getting you're changing. I want to go to the gym with you, but I'm just afraid I don't want to get too bulky. And then I told her, I said, look, the amount of weight that you carry in your purse when we go out to clubs or when we go out to get something to eat
Yeah.
weighs more than 99% of the dumbbells. I mean, she had a really heavy purse, so I don't know if she had like a dead body in there or something like that. But I mean, she had an extremely heavy purse. And then once I told her that, she's like, "Oh yeah, that's you make a good point." So then she went into the gym with me, and then she realized that is such a myth. But one of the things that I also love to talk about that also applies to that and because it affects women, I think so much more than it does men is the confidence boost that it gives you.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many stories that I've had about how confidence has inspired people to do other things. Because I always say it affects women more because men. There's some men that weigh like 400 pounds and they walk in the weight room and they act like they own the place and that's just how they act. But for women especially, that confidence is one of those things too that you can apply to every other aspect in your life that you can take from
Right.
fitness. What has that confidence boost been like for you, and how have you used that to apply it to every other aspect in your life?
For me, it has really like changed my life. Like I said, going back to when I first started
Yep.
training and stuff like that, noticing the changes. And I think for me, one of the biggest things is always, lifting heavier than I thought I could. That, is always a confidence booster for me. Because, it's just me and the weights. And, that's where I do all of my work. So for me, it has just blown my confidence up. I never, going into this industry, I didn't have confidence. I was a shy girl, very naive. You know, so I I see myself in a lot better of a light than I used to, and I always believe in myself a lot more than I used to. So for me, it is just helped my confidence immensely.
Yeah, and I always say that's probably one of the most positive things that I mean, people can really get out of that. And also, I got to ask, was that feeling like, I mean, I'm 6'3", but was that feeling like being 5'4" and going into a gym and knowing that you can out bench and outlift, most of these 6 foot tall guys? That must be a good feeling as well.
It is, and I work out with a lot of people who, most of them are guys,
Mhm.
and um, they have lots of things to say, which always, it always makes me laugh.
You'll hear all the excuses in the world, like, "Oh, it was a bad day for me," or whatever like that, or, "Oh, I'm a little sick," or something like that. Yeah, I bet,
A lot of them will say, can you work out in that little corner so it
yeah.
feels so bad?
Yeah.
Or,
Mhm.
I have a guy there that is now training
Mhm.
powerlifting clients. And he's like, oh, I just got to get you into a show.
Mhm.
And I'm like, no, I don't want to be on a, on a powerlifting meet or whatever.
Mhm.
And he was like, just once, I want to see you. Like,
Yeah.
so he's like, you could break a lot of
Yeah.
records because he watches me lift all the
Mhm.
time. And I have a really, since moving to Florida, I have a really good community of fitness people here. And I think that that's important, the support.
Mhm.
Um, so I found a really good, gym to train at who, a lot of my buddies work out there, and the gym owner, he put me like my picture on the wall from the Olympia and stuff like that. So it really made my day.
Yeah.
And they appreciate us athletes there, which is good.
And that's awesome. And I always say, because I've had about a half dozen powerlifters on here. I mean, it's like that's a whole different type of thing. Because one of the big misconceptions too is that people don't realize that bodybuilders, a lot of it is aesthetic. I mean, there's some people like you that like can actually like lift a lot of like heavy weight. But we've had some of these bodybuilders come on and
Yeah.
they're like, yeah, I can't outlift like a 5 foot like 9 average guy or whatever like that. It's just a lot of his aesthetics. But yeah, it's just that's what I love to talk about, because so many people when they see powerlifters, they don't think, like, oh, they're these people that can bench, like 250 pounds. They just think of like, oh, it's just, someone that might work out every once in a while. But with the bodybuilders, they're just like, oh, they must be able to bench like 400 pounds or something like that. And it's like, no, a lot of it's aesthetic. And some of them, now granted, some of them can, lift a lot of heavy weight, but I always love to just point that out. But now, two of my favorite questions that I love to ask, every single guest that I have on the show, the health and fitness wise, is for the first one, when I was, starting out and getting bigger and stronger, there's so many positive things that went along with it, but there was one negative thing. You're going to get asked to move a lot of people's furniture. You're going to get asked to open a lot of pickle jars. I mean, I'm still at home with my parents for the next couple of months before I move out. And every single time they come in with groceries, I basically have to lift the car into the driveway. Has that been a similar experience with you, where people take one look at you and just assume that you can do favors for them?
um, Not necessarily. I wouldn't say that that's really that big, except for my parents. I think they're the only people that really ask me to do stuff like that.
Okay, so I am probably about half the size of her muscular wise, and she doesn't get asked as much as I do when
No,
she
no,
does. I was like, oh dang. I mean that,
maybe it's the
yeah.
height or
Well, yeah,
something.
that
Yeah.
too. Well, that's what I always say. It's like a double edged sword, because being 6'3", I could have zero muscle at all. I could just be a twig, and people be like, oh yeah, tall guy, come help me with this. So yeah, it's one thing that I had to get used to, because it's like every other weekend last summer, friends were moving out of their parents' house. It's like, hey, you want to come help me move? And I was like, well, I don't want to, but I'll come over and I'll help you move. But I mean, it's just so yeah, it's definitely something that I really had to take into account. And now we talked about this earlier, but this is my favorite question to ask. And again, it's a multi-million dollar idea for anyone out there. But when it comes to clothes for fit women, I mean, guys have their own problems, with
Yeah.
their clothes, but fit women, I always like to say, like if you have big broad shoulders, dresses aren't your best friend. Jeans are another thing that we hear of all the time, because if you have a
Yeah.
big lower body and a small waist, jeans are not made for that. And we already know, like you talked about, how a lot of competitors, they have to have two wardrobes in order to compensate for, their off season and their prep. But what are some other ways that you have found that you're able to compensate for the fact that your clothing options can be very limited?
In off season, I tend to live in a lot of
Mhm.
leggings. They're my best friend lately. So yeah, but Florida's a little bit different because in Canada I could cover up a lot.
Mhm.
So it's different here in Florida because the weather is really warm and everybody's always at
Mhm.
the beach. So a little different, I would say.
What and I always say, if you have arms like that, you gotta show them off, okay? You gotta go sleeveless all the time. It's like, are you kidding me? It's like, even in Canada, I would just be, like, snow throwing in just, like, negative 20-degree weather, and I just go sleeveless and have, like, flannel sleeveless and just be like, "Oh, yep." Just going I mean, I don't care if they get frostbite. I mean, it's like, that's and plus, it's like showing off all your hard work. But, yeah, I always say to anyone out there who's thinking of, coming up with some clothing, just do it,
Yeah.
because, I have so many guests on here that, the demand is high, and, they're willing to pay money for it. So, I mean, it's like you have clients right there. So, I mean, just go ahead with that. But now,
Well, what was funny was a little while ago, I had a pair of like my very favorite jeans,
mhm,
and they were the boyfriend cut jeans. So they fit pretty well. They were like the only pants that I could find that actually would fit good, and they had holes that were already in them.
mhm,
And then just about a week ago, I found that I like actually ripped the ass out of them,
yep,
and I'm like, wow. I'm like, okay, how long have I been walking around like with a big hole in my butt?
mhm.
And then I'm like, they're my very favorite jeans. Now I have to go find some that actually fit.
I mean, and that's the struggle too. And I always tell the story too of I came back after my freshman year of college and I'd put on, about like 10 to 15 pounds of muscle. And I went to a wedding and, I went down to bend over to pick something up and I heard a zzz. Now, luckily luckily it was the shirt inside the suit. So the suit didn't rip, but I lucked out
Oh,
on that one really badly. But that's when I realized, like, hey, I might need to upgrade my wardrobe. This might be something
yeah.
that I need to look into. But now we go to our audience favorite, my personal favorite part of the podcast, a little questionnaire where we're going to ask Amanda here about a dozen or so health and fitness related questions and just, sort of getting to know you questions. And we'll see how our answers stack up to all the other guests that we've had on. So for the first question, what is your go-to workout song at the moment?
Oh my goodness. I don't even have like a favorite. I have like usually the band Disturbed
Mhm,
is like really really good for lifting heavy,
mhm,
or Dana Lynn Bailey's husband Rob has a group that I absolutely love too. So those types of music, so kind of heavy metal, a
mhm.
little bit, really 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 makes me lift heavy.
I mean, I always got to go with my old school cheesy 80s music just because it's so cheesy that it's inspiring. But yeah, like if I know if I have to do like a leg day or any other day, yeah, I'm blast. You better believe I'm blasting Metallica and all those other
Yeah.
types of bands just to get me motivated. But I have a problem. So like I have a gym at home, which is nice. It's not like a
So
nice gym or anything
nice.
like that. It's just little setup, with dumbbells and like a Smith machine and stuff like that. But so I work out there, like 75% of the time. But when I go to a normal gym, I'm one of those guys where I got to wait for the beat to drop. So like if I'm doing like a lat pull down, I'll be like this for like 30 seconds, and I've had people come up to me and be like, "Hey, are you all right? Did you like pull out your back or something like that?" And I was like, "Oh nope, just waiting for the beat to drop." So I am known throughout the gym as the guy that waits for the beat to drop. But hey. I'll take it. But now for our second question in the questionnaire, out of all the celebrities on the planet, if you could work out with any celebrity, who would it be?
Oh my goodness. Probably The Rock.
Hmm. Yep. We get
He's
that
my favorite.
we get that answer 90% of the time, and I completely understand that because yeah, just his workouts that he posts are insane. The dude eats like 10 pounds of asparagus every day, and I was like, okay, that's just crazy. Like what is
And
like
he's very nice
yeah.
to look at.
Yeah, it's very aesthetic. Yeah, I mean, now if he had some hair too, that would also help out though too, I think. But
Oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but I know, yeah, his picture of him with his fanny pack in college is still one of my favorite photos of anyone of all time. I mean, I look at that whenever I'm feeling down sometimes, and it automatically is just a major boost. But now, out of all the celebrities, if you could train any celebrity, who would it be?
um, hmm. That is a good question. Train a celebrity. Huh. Hmm. I probably pick the same one. The Rock.
So you think that you would train the Rock? So the Rock would come up to me and be like, "Okay, she knows way more than I do. Like I need to." No, I'm just joking because I always say like for some people that say
No,
the
I
Rock
think
too is
that
like, yeah,
he probably would be
yeah.
surprised that I could show him some
Oh
things.
yeah. No, I know. I always just say it to guess, just as a joke, because I'm always like, what does The Rock really just come up to? Because like a lot of people just don't realize all these celebrities are super short. A lot of them are. So like people
Yeah.
like will say like Tom Cruise or Mark Wahlberg, and I'm like, those guys are like 5'4". So like if you walk up to him, you'll be like, oh wow. But Dwayne The Rock Johnson is like legitimately like he's like 6'4" or 6'5", I think. So like he's
Uh,
legitimately like a tank basically, just how tall he is and with all that muscle. So yeah, I mean that would be a great
I'm not
person.
saying that I could probably teach him or show him
Yeah.
anything. I just think it would be fun.
Oh yeah, that would be absolutely yeah. That would be a blast, I think, to see it. And yeah, that would yeah. If that ever happens, definitely let me know, and I'll be one of the first people to watch that because that would be
Front
awesome
row
too.
seat.
But now, I mean, I always love to ask, what is one item that you always need to have in your fridge?
Oh, probably my coffee creamer.
Yep, that is a good one. I mean, the
I'm like stuck or hooked on a peppermint mocha one right now. So that is my favorite.
I mean, I always say our most our most popular answers are chicken and eggs, but so it's good to have another different answer. But the most surprising
Those are
answer,
just always
oh
those
yeah.
are always in my fridge.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, yeah, yeah, and I always say the most surprising answer by far, hands down, is I had never known until I started this podcast that mustard was such a huge thing with bodybuilders
Oh
because,
gosh, yeah.
it's 0 in calories, 0 in fat, so you put it on your chicken, you put it on your egg, you just put it on anything just to add a little bit
I
of
put it on
flavor.
everything.
And I always say that. I always say, like you might want to reevaluate your life and things like if you're having to put mustard on everything because I was a mustard guy until like about age 5, and then I switched over to team ketchup, and people are always like, well, you can always get that sugar-free ketchup that's like 0 in fat, and I was like, okay, that's not real ketchup. Let's be honest. So if they again another invention out there, if you can invent a ketchup that is 0 in fat and 0 in calories, I would be one of the first people, and it tastes exactly the same. I would be the
Yeah,
first person
right. Yeah.
to buy that. But now, out of all of your followers that you have on Instagram, what is one thing that you think that they would be surprised to find out about you if they met you in person?
That they would probably not know that I'm more of an introvert.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, that's one thing that we hear a lot too with the bodybuilders, which is I mean is just fascinating in and of itself because I mean you're willing to go up on stage and do all of the posing and stuff like that. But do you think that that's also part of your introvert just trying to that's also part of you that's just trying to get out is like the part when you go on stage and posing, like that's just the one aspect of you where you're just like I can finally come out of my shell then?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a psychiatrist as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, no, I don't. Yeah,
I'll
but
send you a bill later.
oh yeah, send me the yeah, I'll bill it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, but and that's great that you have that outlet where people because a lot of people don't have that outlet, so then they're just like an introvert and they don't really associate with anyone then. So I mean, it's great that you found that. But now, if you were given the all-knowing power, if someone went up to you and said, what, Amanda, all of us in the fitness industry have decided, you can change one thing about the sport of bodybuilding, and we would all go along with it. What would be one thing that you would like to see change about the sport?
I would like to see change. I would like the classic physiques to come back from like the 90s, the 80s and 90s, and when bodybuilding was great.
Mhm.
And I would also like to bring back women's bodybuilding.
Yep, absolutely. And you're talking about like the '90s physique. We're having Linda Murray on Wednesday, so
Oh, that's
I'm really
awesome.
excited about that because when you think about bodybuilding in the '90s, women's bodybuilding at least, I mean it's Linda Murray. I mean that's the
Yeah.
so yeah. So I'm very excited that. But yeah, bringing back bodybuilding as well. I mean that was dumb when they took it away because it's like. Yeah, I just never really understood, why and they're just they give all these excuses and it's like, what, just bring it back because I mean it's like or at least make it part of the Olympia or the Arnold or
Yeah.
just stuff
It's
like that.
sad to not see it at a lot of shows.
Yeah, I mean, and I couldn't agree more. And it just seems like there's not many people that are just getting into that. I mean, it's just a lot of the people that have just still held on to women's bodybuilding, competitor wise. I mean, it doesn't seem like there's that much of a new crop of people that are just like, hey, I just want to do bodybuilding, which
Yeah,
I think
it's
really,
hard.
yeah.
I have a lot of
Mhm,
women friends who are women's
mhm.
bodybuilding, and it's hard for them.
Yeah,
So
100%. So yeah, if I could bring awareness out there, I mean, it's like yeah, if it ever comes back, I mean, that would be great. But now going on to the fun part of our questionnaire. So now, what is the last TV show that you binge watched?
oh my goodness. I love like Netflix and Hulu and stuff. So, probably two of my favorite shows that I've binge watched so far are Shameless and Ozark.
Yeah, I've heard good things about both of them, and I haven't seen them yet, so I definitely got to get into that. But now, what's your favorite TV show of all time?
Oh my goodness. I have a lot.
Yeah.
I love crime shows.
Mhm.
And like just silly reality TV
Mhm.
shows because it's something that's like pure entertainment
Yeah.
but probably like, Criminal Minds or
Mhm.
something like that is one of my favorites.
I gotta say, I'm the most basic person of all time. The Office and Friends. I mean, they're just a tie for me. Where I mean, it's just like no matter what
Big
if they
Bang
come on.
Theory is
Big
great
Bang
too.
Theory is great too. Yeah, I love that show, and I'm sad that it's slowly coming to an end. But it had a really great run. But now everyone has one. What is a guilty pleasure movie that you enjoy?
Movie. Oh my goodness. Um, I love horror movies.
Mhm.
People don't know this about me, but I absolutely love to be scared for some reason.
Mhm.
Um, but I always get disappointed with like horror movies from now because they always, as opposed to like when I was a kid, they're more gore and like special effects now. So it's hard for me to watch like something and get scared.
Mhm. Oh,
So
I was gonna say I completely understand what you're talking about because like the original Halloween is one of my favorite movies of all time,
yeah,
and it's just they didn't go for the gore. I mean, if you that's one of those movies where if you watch it, I don't think there's actually any blood in it. Like it just goes for, just the scary factor, and yeah, I couldn't
I
agree with
liked
you
the
more.
old, like, Texas Chainsaw
Yeah.
Massacre.
Yeah, that stuff is, yeah, like all that stuff, like the original Friday the 13th, all of those movies, yeah, are just great. And I totally agree with you. Like I saw the new Halloween in theaters with my dad and my brother, and we just left saying like, this is crap. Like what,
Yeah.
like so yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more on that. But now we go to our last two questions. So now what is your favorite fashion trend of all time, and what is your least favorite fashion trend of all time?
Oh, um, the romper would probably be my least favorite. I don't really think that it's attractive looking,
Mm-hmm.
even with regardless of what type of physique you have. I think that it's just a hanging fabric that I don't really think complements any physique.
Mm-hmm.
So that would probably be my least favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my most favorite, hmm, I don't know, probably like the boyfriend jeans right
Yeah, and I mean, yeah,
now.
that's definitely a good answer. But now our last question of the questionnaire: if you could go back in time and talk to the 18-year-old version of yourself, what would be the best piece of advice you would give her?
Oh, I would give her, I would say, basically, don't compare yourself to anybody. You're beautiful just the way you are. Um, and you have everything inside of you to become the person you want to be. So anything is possible.
Yeah, I mean, and I would honestly just say that myself too, because that is just such a great thing. But now we have our two final questions of the podcast. So, if we were to talk to you, a year from now, where would you like to be at bodybuilding wise, and where would you like to just be at in your life? Are you planning on competing at all this year, or what is your current process?
Um, for the next year, I would actually, my goal for myself is to become a pro.
Mhm,
So that is my bodybuilding goal.
mhm,
Um, Personally, just I just moved here to Florida about 4 or 5 months ago. So just to building a life here for myself, um, is my goal personally. And competitive wise, this year I'll be competing in the fall at 2 shows. So I'm hoping to do North Americans end of August,
mhm.
and then the Olympia again.
And that's awesome. And honestly, we wish you nothing but the best. I mean, I personally think you're going to do great. But now, our last question: is there anyone that you'd like to give a shout out to before we wrap things up?
I would just like to say shout out to basically all of my Canadian friends who I compete with all the time, and then all of the friends that I've made here in Florida, my family. That's basically it. Thank you for all the love and support for all of my followers and people that watch my Instagram or my Facebook.
Absolutely. And I'll leave a link down to all of that stuff for everyone. And again, everyone, go and give Amanda a follow. Like I said, links for everything. Just looking at some of her photos, you're going to realize, like, hey, I need to get off the couch and stop eating these Twinkies and, get into shape. But again, you guys, this is Ryan Johnson, DD on the spot. And Amanda, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. And we're going to be
Thank you so
signing
much.
out now. And everyone, have a great day.